On this edition of the program, some thoughts on Mamdani going forward. We are joined by a man who's going to explain why we shouldn't be finding common ground. We should be finding neutral ground in the ocean. It'll make sense when you hear it. David Litt, former Obama speechwriter, joins the program. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for June 27, 2025. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you here on the show. Can everybody feel it? It feels like a summer week, right? We got a weekend coming in, a lot of people going on vacation. Next week, people will be in and out. Congress will be very, very, very engaged. We'll get to that in a second. But I don't know, maybe just the fact that World War III was on the menu at the beginning of the week and now it's not, that we're like, oh, okay. I feel a psychic unclenching. Make whatever metaphor of that you'd like. Justin Robert Young here, as always. Got a great conversation. David Litt. He has written a couple books, and his most recent is very personal. It's a little political, and I think it's a good conversation to get into as we are moving into the summer. He's got a new book out called It's Only Drowning. We'll talk about it. Before we do, though, I would like to talk about the new star that has been born, and that is Zohran Mamdani, the prohibitive favorite to be the mayor of New York City. On the bonus episode, Substack exclusive, I gave a whole spiel as to why he won. You can correctly call me a coward for giving you all the reasons why Zohran was going to win and then picking Cuomo. I should have just went all in and said Zohran's going to win because I was very impressed with his campaign. I was disgusted by Cuomo's campaign. But I ultimately thought that the Cuomo brand would carry it. Not the case. Not the case. Zohran knocks him out in the first round. Not mathematically with ranked choice voting, but Cuomo knew that his goose was cooked, and so he resigned. The New York Post is now saying he's not going to run in the independent or as an independent in the general, for which he had an out. That being said, all that being said, here's the reality. Zohran is now a big, glittering star. He is the number one electoral story in politics. Now, that's partly because we're on the dark side of the moon in terms of the political calendar, but it's also because this is the beginning of the midterms, right? We are now getting candidates that are announcing. This is when things begin to start happening, and you want to wonder, well, okay, what is each side going to run on? This matters. I mean, like, I know look, you're listening to a podcast about politics in June of an off year election. So you guys are sickos like I'm a sicko. I'm going to explain to you why it matters. Because right now, the White House, I'm recording this on Thursday, the White House is doing a big, beautiful event. Why are they doing a big, beautiful event? Well, because they want to pass the big, beautiful bill, but they also want to run on the achievements in that bill by the time the midterms roll around. So they are hoping that when the midterms roll around, the economy's humming. People have had a year to not have tax on tips. They are hoping a lot of things are happening, right? But the Democrats need their version of that. They want to run on the chaos of the immigration deportations. They want to run on cuts to Medicaid that might happen in this big, beautiful bill. But what the Republicans are now salivating over is the ability to run against Zohran Mamdani. They want a guy who describes himself as a democratic socialist in New York City to be the mascot for the entire party. Why? Because they can then sell to swing districts, right? These are 50-50 districts that are going to determine who controls the House, that if you elect this party, if you put this party back in charge, you're going to get two things: socialism and impeachment. If you don't think that those two things are good ideas, then don't vote for Democrats. That's what they want to do. That's the reason why Donald Trump mentioned Mamdani immediately on Truth Social. It's the reason why Mamdani is at the tip of everybody's tongue on conservative podcasts. This is the goal. So if you're Mamdani, let's take it from his perspective. Congratulations. You are at the center of the circus. It might be a little unfair for you to do one very difficult thing, and now every move you make is going to be judged on a national standard. But them's the breaks in the big city, quite literally, considering he wants to be mayor of NYC. I think he is a rare political talent. However, the bright lights that are about to hit him are going to be unlike anything he has ever experienced. You know, there was a little burp in his race against Cuomo where he went on a Bulwark podcast and stumbled a little bit around the phrase globalize the intifada. If that happens now, it's not a Twitter thing. It's a 72-hour story on Fox News in the middle of the summer when there's nothing else happening. That's the stakes. That's what we are looking at right now with Mamdani. As for his actual election, he is going to be running against somebody who actually cares about getting elected to the post, and that is the current mayor of New York City, Eric Adams. He is an animated guy. He was cast aside by the Democratic establishment because he went after Joe Biden. He then faced federal charges for his connections to Turkey. Then there was whether or not he was too close to Trump because the Trump federal Justice Department was going to look to drop the charges, did drop the charges. So there's a lot packed in there, but now the centrist money, the centrist attention is going to go back on the man that, in my opinion, look, I'm not a New York Democrat. In my opinion, I just would have stuck with the current mayor. Why do you give up incumbency? Still, Democrats did. They threw him overboard for Cuomo, and now look where they come back. And it's going to be very funny. Oh, it is going to be very funny to me because all the people that stabbed this guy in the back are now going to line up and explain why. You want to know what? He stuck with you, New York. When the critics came after him, he believed in you. He's Eric Adams. I've been joking on Twitter that we are counting down the days until there's a portrait framed picture of Eric Adams on the front cover of the New York Times Magazine with a big headline, "Still Here. Why Mayor Eric Adams never gave up on New York." They're going to rehabilitate him. The centrist avenues of Democratic politics are going to rehabilitate him because they're going to be scared about what happens with Mamdani nationally. And they're going to be scared if Mamdani wins in November, whether or not that's going to affect the midterms. All right, let's go ahead and get to David. We'll be back with the update. Well, just in case you've had a lot of news to digest over the last week and possibly are going on vacation with your family, you might need a little bit of a guide as to how to navigate these kinds of things. And good for you that there's a brand new book out. It's Only Drowning by David Litt, which explores these very themes. David joins us right now. Welcome to the program, David.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I know there's nothing going on, but I'm sure we'll have something to talk about.
You know, let's kind of start in the moment, and then we'll go back to the premise of the book.
Yeah, let's do it.
There was a beat after the election when I kind of felt like, you know, things ran so hot during the first Trump term. And it seemed like through the Biden administration, there had been some kinds of reckonings with, where politics had pushed us. And then you have this obvious election that shows that there's a popular vote in another direction. So there seemed to be this element of soul searching that led people to more common ground. And now that feels like it's almost completely evaporated as things have kind of run just as hot in some circles as they did during the first Trump administration. As somebody who's thought a lot about political polarization and how it affects our personal lives, where do you judge the separation? Where are the continental drifts right now?
Well, one of the things this book is about, and I realized, I'm just gonna show the cover up front here in case.
There we go.
There it is. It's yellow. It's beachy. I feel like this is
perfect summer book.
Exactly. I think of this as kind of like a beach read for times when your brain isn't going to be totally on vacation. So it's kind of the right, hopefully, I think you'll find it's the right sweet spot. And this book is about me and my brother-in-law, Matt, who are on the opposite sides of all of these divides that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So, he is an electrician. I am a writer. So he deals with like dangerous shocks and I deal with carpal tunnel. I have an Ivy League degree. He has his electrician's license. He drives a pickup truck to work. There goes the book. He drives a pickup truck to work. And I'm like work from home and still do. And I was working from home even before the pandemic.
Before it was cool.
Before it was cool and before it was and now after it's uncool on both sides.
Yeah.
And so I did not plan for this to be a political book at all. I started surfing. We started surfing together. I was like, this is great. I used to be a speechwriter for Obama. And then I was like, all right, I'm done with politics. I'm a surfer now. Yeah. And I found myself living through all of these divides that were tearing the country apart. And I think one of the things I learned from that is it's not, you said, where is the divide? It's almost like, where is the divide these days? And one of the things that I found was that actually seeking out a space that doesn't have those intense divides. And for me and Matt, that was surfing. But I think for everybody, it's different, right? No matter what your version of surfing is, that I think that is something that, for me was a big moment in the book, realizing that neutral ground makes a big difference. And my podcast etiquette is terrible here. I hope you did not hear your listeners did not hear a ding, but if they did,
they did. But you want to know what? They understand it.
I appreciate it.
We have a lot of work from homers in our audience too. So right. they understand it.
Famously understanding listeners. So my apologies to all of you for the ding. Won't happen.
Although
again.
It's like playing a police siren in a radio ad. Like it probably just set them looking for their own emails more than
that's also
bothering
true.
with us.
Yeah.
All right. So let's bring it to the beginnings of this book. What led you to wanting to learn how to surf from your brother? Where are you in your life when this period begins?
Well, my thinking for a very long time was surfing is for lunatics, in part because Matt surfed. So I was like, okay, if he surfs,
he's a crazy person.
Yeah, he's a crazy person. So crazy.
Ergo.
Yeah, ergo. That's exactly how I felt about it. And then I had the worst year of my life. This was 2021, kind of immediately post-pandemic, so enough that we were all still kind of locked down mentally, but not living through the day-to-day where there was
where did you survive the lockdown?
So I should say, I mean, by most standards, I was extremely lucky, right? I was in Asbury Park, New Jersey, near the beach. You know, I was healthy. I could work from home. By like standards of people living through a global pandemic, I was really lucky. By standards of what it was like to be me at the time, I ended up getting really depressed. And I think it was in part the feeling of just being a millennial where the world we were promised is so different than the world that we got.
Yeah.
And also being someone who always takes that stuff personally, right? When you're in politics, when I was in the White House, you know, and then I've been sort of politics adjacent since, you have to take the news personally. But when you do that too much, it can really get to you, especially these days.
Yeah.
And so I was at this place where I was, for 6 months, a year, really struggling to do anything. And finally, you know, my wife kept saying, you need to get a hobby. And I would say, I have a hobby, and my hobby is reading the news and worrying. And finally, she kind of talked me into it, and I snapped out of something. And I said, okay, I'm going to try something new. And so I walked into a Glide, which is a surf shop in Asbury Park. And I asked the woman behind the counter, do you know anyone who does surf lessons? And she said, I could, in a way that meant I never have. But
yeah. It's like, I can watch a YouTube video and we'll see what happens.
And I was like, I could watch a YouTube video about surfing. This is great. We'll be a great fit. So I signed up. And, you know, the rest is history, or at least the book.
The book. Before we get into the healthy part about this that teaches people good lessons, let's go back to the mental illness for a few seconds, because it's something that I very much relate to. I also was intensely affected by the pandemic, and you know, it was something that hit me a lot harder than I think I realized, and I don't know where along the lines of it being I just needed more human contact than I think that I realized. You know, at that point I was working from home, so I didn't feel like I was in lack of it, but the denial of it was a very big thing. Was there a moment, I know for me, you know, I had just gotten this show off the ground to the point where I was traveling to cover stuff. And that was something that was really exciting, that I could fully finance a independent media operation, that I could be a traveling journalist on the level that I would have in the past. And then it all of a sudden goes away. So that was part of it. But I think that there was something that kind of broke in me when we got past like the month. Like there had already been enough, like it wasn't going to be 2 weeks. It wasn't going to be another 2 weeks. It wasn't going to be another 2 weeks, where you start to realize like, oh, Lucy can only pull the football away from me so many times before I just have to assume this is forever. What was a moment during the lockdown where you were just like, oh my God?
I think it was when they started introducing new variants, right? Like it was like Taylor Swift was dropping albums and COVID was dropping variants at roughly the same pace. And I'm like so happy for Taylor Swift and so pissed about COVID. But it was particularly that feeling of, oh, the vaccine isn't going to solve everything. And there were two versions of that. One was the huge fight, right? We're talking about divisions. Matt didn't get vaccinated and I did. And we were never friends before that, but it really, like, whatever we were a lot less of it because of the vaccine. And I'm really talking about that more, you know, as we keep chatting. But the other thing that also just got to me was that feeling of, oh, okay, we're doing this all again, right? Like we knew that it was possible that something vaccine resistant could come up, but it was this sense of exactly what you said, the football being pulled away. Yeah. And I think that's also part of, you know, I mean, this is just my demographic, right? But like guys in their 30s and 40s, from what I could tell, we didn't handle the pandemic great, right? Like, this is a generalization, but almost everyone I know, every straight couple I know, everyone went through it, but the guy went through it worse. And I think, you know, I asked my wife why that was, and she said because she feels like women are just, society sort of says we're going to pull the football out away from you sooner in life and more often.
They're used to it.
Yeah. And so in a weird way, it's like the flip side of just like being a guy is that you're like, oh, okay, everything, you know, I can be anything I want to be. And then the universe is like, no, actually there's a universe and it controls you much more than you would like. I think that's part of it. But I also think it's just, and it was tough. And I also think the other thing that was tough, and I think it goes back to a big theme of this book, which is friendship between two guys, is that I think there was, at least for me, I have great friends, but I didn't have the sort of emotional support network from my friends that I think my wife had from hers. It was just because we were like guys, we don't talk about stuff in the way that, Jackie and her friends talk about stuff. And I think, I often say that one of the hardest things I've ever done is learn to surf. The only thing that's harder is making a new friend in my 30s. And this book is about both.
Where did you and your brother grow up?
So I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. More just in case you were running out of divisions to talk about, right?
Sure.
I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Matt grew up in Oakhurst, New Jersey, which is very middle class. The section of it that he grew up in, very middle class. And he now lives in Brick, which is like the heart of New Jersey's Trump country. We don't have a huge Trump country, but it's passionate. And so Matt calls Brick Bricktucky, and he says that as a compliment. And so again, like, and even in New Jersey now, we spent the pandemic in Asbury Park, which is like where Bruce Springsteen got his start. It's live music. The LGBTQ community is very, very active in Asbury. So, it's a really diverse place. So it's a very blue dot on the shore. And then, Matt lives in a very red slice of the shore. And so I do think that also, certainly affected the way that both of us see the world. But it also felt like this, it feels like we're constantly being told that there's like real America and fake America. And so Matt definitely comes from real America, and I come from what they would call fake America.
Yeah. I assume that there's a age gap if you guys didn't grow up in the same place.
Well, so he's my wife's brother. My wife's younger brother.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So brother-in-law.
He's my brother-in-law. And so he is 3 years younger than me.
Gotcha. Okay.
But also, like, how it's that younger sibling energy, right? Like if I don't know how much older or younger you are than I am, but like if we were 3 years apart and we met, we're at an age where we'd be like, we're the same age. Yeah. But if it's a younger sibling, or your wife,
I literally my younger brother is 3.5 years younger than me, so I know exactly what that is.
Yeah, that's a lifetime in siblings, and like not very important in anyone else. So I do think that it always had that dynamic as well. Although it's interesting, Matt is now the age I was when I started surfing. And I can see that, like, he's dealing with being 35 and a guy, right? Like you start to realize like time is not unlimited. I'm not old, but I'm not like a young person anymore. And it's challenging.
All right. So let's go back to this story. You decide that you are going to surf. The lady at the store is not exactly enthusiastic on helping to teach you, but you are now into this hobby. How does Matt come into the picture?
All right, gotta set that guy up again for all your listeners. That's the exciting sound of an author leaning their book up for the video in the podcast. So interestingly, my original plan was to never, ever, ever tell Matt that I started surfing because he's really good. Yeah. And I immediately found out that there were two big problems for me in surfing. One was water, and the other was every life decision I had made up until the point I started surfing.
Gotcha.
Physically, surfing was the hardest thing I've ever done. Like, there are muscles you use in surfing that you don't even know that you have and that you will never use in your entire life unless you surf. And then suddenly they're the most important things in the world. It's a really hard sport to learn. And I was not a natural at it. And I kind of figured, okay, if I let him know that I'm surfing, basically he's just going to make fun of me or be like, why are you doing this? Which is a fair question. And then I set this goal for myself because I kind of got hooked on surfing. And I said, I want to make it to Hawaii's North Shore, which is one of the most dangerous places in the sport. It's one of the toughest places to surf. I wasn't trying to surf a 100-foot wave, but I was trying to surf an overhead wave on Hawaii's North Shore. I would call it a wave of consequence, right?
Yeah.
And once I decided to do that, I was like, all right, well, if I do that alone, I will die. I don't want to die. So I need another surfer in the water who I trust, right? Who I know will protect me and whose instincts I really think will guide me in the right direction. And I didn't know anyone who fit that description because I only knew one other surfer, and that surfer was Matt. So I said, okay, why don't we start surfing together? And, what amazes me looking back on it is how much I learned from him that I never imagined I would, not just about surfing, although he turned out to be a pretty good surf instructor, but also just in general, right, about life. And if you had told me, if we were having this conversation 3 years ago and you said, you're going to learn a lot and you're going to become a better person, and your brother-in-law, the one with the skull decal on the back of his truck who listens almost exclusively to death metal, is going to help make you better, I would have been like, yeah, no, no way.
When are we talking about it? At the point that you and Matt are surfing, and I'm asking you that so I can mental map what is happening in politics at the time that all this is happening, because I am sure that is something that eventually comes up the longer you guys are together.
It does. We started in 2022, so the midterms, right?
Gotcha.
What was interesting about that moment was that even though the 2022 midterms went pretty well for Democrats, there was this sense going into even up until election night that Democrats were going to get crushed, not just like lose, but lose in a way that basically made Trump winning inevitable. Now, obviously he won anyway, but all of the governor's races in swing states, you had state secretaries of state races in swing states, basically people who were going to control the 2024 election. So it was like going to be game over for democracy. And so one of the things I found was that I just at the time did not have the courage to fight that fight. I normally do stuff, right? I try to volunteer. I've worked in politics full time. And I just
you would plug in. This wouldn't just be in the same way that many people who are listening to this would invest in it emotionally and keep track of it. You are somebody that's been a part of Democratic Party politics, and you would have found in another world, you would have found a way to plug in and apply your services.
Yeah, like I'm not professionally a politician or a political person anymore, but I'm like semi-pro, right? In other words, sometimes someone will bring me in and sort of say, hey, I'm working on this thing. What do you think? Sometimes they'll hire me. Usually it's just kind of a volunteer thing. But once you do a job, like, writing speeches in the White House, you end up getting phone calls periodically. And usually that's one of my favorite parts about my life, right, is that I get to do all the things that I get to do. And then also I get to have this part-time volunteer gig where I feel like I can help, hopefully, and make a difference. And because of the depression we're talking about, I just was not in that place. I was almost like trying to forget that politics existed and that the world outside of surfing existed. And one of the things that I found through surfing was A, that's impossible, but B, thinking about where I'm at now, I feel much more capable of balancing those two things, right? I have a life, I have things that bring me joy and that are fun. And also, I feel not just an obligation, but an excitement about getting involved in the world. And that's really hard, especially when the world is as messed up as it currently is. And so I think that's one of the things I learned. And again, I never would have imagined that surfing would have taught me that. I was just trying to like do something different in the water and, maybe get some cool pictures. And then, it really ended up changing my life.
So just to paint the picture for folks listening, 2022, obviously you are full into the let's go Brandon right. You have inflation that is kicking up. You have the variants, as you pointed out, the Omicron variant. But then Roe versus Wade gets overturned. So now there is this surge for the Democrats. And within all of this, almost as if the waves crashing upon the shore, you are out there off the coast of Jersey to learn how to surf. You mentioned that the big goal was getting out to Hawaii. I assume that this is part of the journey that you are on, you and Matt eventually ending up out there.
Yeah. So we did. I mean, I feel like this is a spoiler, right? Because I might have drowned. That might have been the end of the book.
That might be the case. Yeah. This might just be an AI recreation of David that his publisher is trotting out.
That, now that I think about it, that would be the way to do a real campaign for the book, is like do a whole thing where we just claim that I did drown and this is purely AI. And I think we're like a year away from that. Anyway.
We'll know if it was powered by Grok if you start talking about the plight of white South Africans.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm like, well, we made it to Hawaii, which reminded me of South Africa, white genocide in South Africa, coincidentally. And also, you know what else reminds me of white genocide in South Africa? Literally everything.
Yeah.
We did eventually get there. We did a bunch of trips first, both because I needed to get better at surfing, but also because at the time, Matt and I had never spent more than maybe 5 minutes in a car together. I mean,
really? So you guys didn't have much of a relationship at all leading into this?
Not at all. We didn't. I mean, I would say we were like acquaintances, except related by marriage acquaintances for a long time. And then we were kind of frosty to each other, right? Kind of cold shoulder during the pandemic because of vaccination.
Because of the vaccines.
That was me more than him, right? I felt almost a responsibility to be kind of not friendly to him, which in retrospect, I think was dumb, but that's how I felt at the time. And then once we started surfing together, I remember going in the car because one of the things that I learned is that the best waves in New Jersey are in winter. And so it's like 40-degree water. Sometimes it's, below zero with wind chill. And so we were in his truck one morning driving to Rockaway Beach, which is kind of out by Coney Island in Brooklyn. And I just realized I had this moment where I was like, oh, this is an hour and a half long car ride. Like, we've never been in the car. So we ended up taking a bunch of trips, starting with like a little day trip like that one. And we went to Santa Cruz, California. We went to a wave pool in Waco, Texas. And then we went to France, actually, which was a little different. And then we went to Hawaii to kind of cap off this journey. And so we did make it there. And I did, I surfed that overhead wave that I had been training toward. The other thing I learned, though, that's cool about surfing is not super goal-oriented in the sense of, like, when you do it, what's exciting about it is that you just get to keep surfing. And that's another thing I kind of learned about surfing and about life, right? I had always been someone who's like, okay, if I hit this milestone, maybe then I won't feel pressure or stress.
Yeah.
And then you hit the milestone and you're like, wait a second, the stress moved, right? You were talking earlier about the Lucy pulling the football, and sometimes if you live your life just trying to get to the next thing, then you're setting that up where the football is constantly being pulled away from you. And so I am super proud that I did surf an overhead wave, but now looking back on it, I'm even more proud that I'm like, but it doesn't define me, right? Like what defines me is everything else about me. And I think I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't started surfing. It's definitely not the way political careers work, right?
I was just going to say that's something that I feel like is endemic not only to politics in general, where literally there is a structure of like local to regional to national political existences, and like you experience, there's all sorts of things around that, including speech writing and stuff like that. But also it feels like it's everything else around politics as well, including journalism and media and stuff like that everybody is kind of on this ladder that is climbing up. And oftentimes it's very tempting to just do it for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's also one of those things where if you're good at it when you're in your 20s and the pyramid is a little wider, it certainly did in my experience, start to mess with you as you get a little bit older and further up that ladder, and you realize, hey, there's a lot of luck involved. There's a lot of chance. There's things might work the way I want, things might not, right? The life is long and it's full of surprises, and many of them are great, but you can't control all of it, right? If you felt like you were in control in the beginning of your career, which not everybody is, but I felt like I was extremely lucky, and kind of was like, I feel like I'm exactly where I want to be. And then the pandemic, right? You start to feel like, whoa, there's less control. And if you don't handle it right, I can say from experience, it can really mess you up. Yeah. And so I think one of the things that I felt like I took away from my experience surfing and that I took back to the rest of my life, including the politics and politics adjacent stuff that I do, is this sense of life is unpredictable and out of control, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have goals and ambitions and go for stuff. It just means that you have to be able to say, okay, the milestone isn't everything, right? The brass ring isn't everything. Why am I doing this? And if I love what I'm doing and I care about what I'm doing, then the thing that really matters is that I'm doing it, not that I achieved that goal while still having the ambition. You still want to achieve it.
Yeah. This is your update brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you go to support the show. It's our Substack. It's a good time. We love it. We love you. 2 bonus episodes each and every week. It's $3 a week, price of a cup of coffee. If you'd buy me a cup of coffee to talk to you in your car, back and forth, on your commute, on your run, wherever you listen to podcasts, 2 more times a week, buy me 1 cup of coffee, this is a deal. It's an absolute deal. You can do annual. You save even more money. Come on, folks. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Here are the stories we didn't have a chance to get to during the podcast. The White House is pushing hard to pass its major legislative package, the one big, beautiful bill, by July 4th. This is what the White House says. We need to do it by July 4th. That's next Friday. So that means that the Senate has to pass it. That means the House has to pass it. Now you can go into conference and hash out the differences between the 2 bills, or you can pre-conference, and that's what they're doing right now, trying to figure out something that both sides could pass so they could also go on their July 4th break. As we mentioned at the top of the show, President Trump hosted an event promoting the bill's benefits and urging support, while officials minimized the parliamentarians' rulings as manageable obstacles. And one of those rulings was saying that they could not cut Medicaid in the same way that they had listed that they were going to, but the House version and then parts of the Senate version. The administration warned that failure to pass the bill could damage the Republicans' midterm chances and derail Trump's legislative agenda. Fact check true. Internal GOP divisions persist, however, with moderates resisting proposed Medicaid cuts and hardliners seeking deeper reductions to fund tax breaks. Trump has met with both factions with mixed signals on his preferred path. Some allies want to fire the parliamentarian. This happens every time there's a gigantic mega bill like this, because the parliamentarian is the referee that rules what is and is not relevant to the budget. A reminder that a reconciliation bill has the benefit of only having to pass by a simple majority. It bypasses what is known as the filibuster, or the 60-vote threshold. So in this case, any bill that would pass the Senate would need 7 Democrats, minimum. In a reconciliation package, they can afford to lose. The Republicans can afford to lose 3 red votes. Again, this happens all the time. Parliamentarian in a reconciliation package, the thing that is the downside is that every element of that bill has to relate to the budget. And the parliamentarian is the one who decides what relates to the budget and what doesn't. There's always a call to fire the parliamentarian. No one ever does it because I don't know why. Actually, I have no idea why no one's ever just gone out of their way to fire the parliamentarian. The other side is that you can just ignore them, which is what other people say. Advisors remain concerned over Republican unity, while economic advisor Stephen Moore warned that the failure would be both political and economic catastrophe. There is a ticking time bomb here, a few ticking time bombs. The first is going to be whenever Scott Bessent says that America will run out of money to pay its debts, and therefore the debt ceiling will need to be raised. There is a raising of the debt ceiling in this one big, beautiful bill. So that is one ticking time bomb. The big ticking time bomb is taxes, because the Trump tax cuts expire this year, which means that next time that you do your taxes, you would have to pay the rate before the Trump tax cuts. This is going to pass. How it passes, what's in it, up for debate. But this is going to pass. There's a lot of stuff that's being fought over right now that I think everyone knows they need to run on a tax cut. Every Republican wants to say in their ads in the midterms, my opponent would have raised your taxes by 40%, whatever, the number, because they would have let the tax cuts expire. I did not. I voted for X, Y, and Z, blah, 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 blah. Elise Stefanik is preparing to launch her campaign for New York State governor. Insiders confirmed that it is not a matter of if, but when. A strong Trump ally, Stefanik leads early GOP primary polling, outpacing Mike Lawler 44% to 7%. It's a bit of a lead. Trump's recent endorsements of Lawler and Bruce Blakeman for re-election have fueled speculation that he's clearing a path for Stefanik, which is basically Stefanik was promised the UN. She was named to the UN, and then Trump had to pull her back to the House because they need the right votes for this one big, beautiful bill. So now Stefanik's going to run against Kathy Hochul. Hochul is unpopular. Stefanik is more popular within her own party, but it would be a big change. There has not been a Republican governor in New York State since George Pataki. Been a while. When George Pataki was governor, I was in college in New York State. That's a long time. I have gray hair and a child now. Cook Political Report has the gubernatorial race as likely Democratic. As of now, we'll see what happens with the polling. Hochul is not popular. I think this is a good calculated risk for Stefanik to run. We would see what would happen with that seat of hers in New York. And finally, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that Medicaid patients do not have a right to choose their medical provider, a decision that could significantly impact Planned Parenthood. The ruling, stemming from a South Carolina effort to block Medicaid's use at Planned Parenthood clinics, was supported by the Trump administration. Authored by Justice Neil Gorsuch, who's been a bit of a wild card with stuff like this, the decision may encourage other states to cut Planned Parenthood from Medicaid programs, accelerating conservative efforts to defund the organization. Nearly half of Planned Parenthood patients use Medicaid, and losing that funding could restrict access not just to abortions, but also vital services like STI testing, cancer screenings, and birth control. Planned Parenthood's going to be in some trouble. And let me just say this. Where are Democrats on abortion? They had an event the other day, but they've talked so much more about whether or not the Iranian enrichment facility of Fordo is destroyed, for which no one's going to know for months for sure, right? So arguing about it is just silly, but they spent more time talking about that than they've spent talking about abortion. Only one of these issues has won Democratic politicians' elections for decades, all right? And it's not Fordo. It's abortion. Salute to PX3 guest and my friend, Katie Stech-Ferrick of the Wall Street Journal. She had an amazing article that came out this week. Kat Kamik, Republican congresswoman, telling the story about how she had to argue with her doctors to abort her ectopic pregnancy. That's something that could kill her. She spoke to Katie about it. These are the things you should be bringing to light. I think the Democrats would be in a better political situation if they were talking about things like these and not Kilmar Abrego Garcia and not Fordo. I know that there's not an immediate, we get to own Drumpf part of this, but I do think that these are the narratives that help you build trust with an electorate because these are issues they trust you on. No one trusts the Democrats to tell whether or not an Iranian enrichment facility is destroyed. No one trusts Democrats to know whether or not this, dude is a human trafficker and a MS-13 gangbanger. They trust Democrats on women's health. I don't know. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills sometimes. TakePoliticsSeriously.com is where you need to go if you want to support this show. Back to David. Well, it sounds like there's a ton in here for folks that are probably working a little bit too hard and need to define themselves on things outside of their profession. But one of the big lessons that you talk about a lot in this book is the connection of political dialogue between you and Matt. So bring us into one of those awkward, long rides or plane rides between wherever you guys were going. Where does that relationship begin to form? Is it all on non-political stuff before you talk about political stuff? Do you have to build up the calluses to understand that your political opinions aren't going to be convincible to the other person? How does that work?
Well, I like that analogy you just used of building up calluses, because I think that does kind of describe it. I went into this, maybe partly because I'm an Obama guy still at heart, thinking, okay, we're going to find out we have all this common ground, right? On paper, we seem really different, but actually we're not different at all, right? We're we're similar. We're the same. And it turns out that's the opposite, right? Like I just confirmed that we are totally different people in so many different ways. What I learned is that our differences are meaningful, but they don't mean as much as I thought, right? That I think is the thing that we miss a lot, not just as a country these days, but within friendships, within families.
Yeah.
Is this sense of we have these big differences, they're real, and then this is the part that I think is a mistake, therefore they have to define us. And it's snipping out that last part. And the way I found to do it is stop focusing on common ground and focus on neutral ground instead. So for me and Matt, that was surfing, but I think anyone listening can sort of think about what that might look like in their own lives. And I think by being able to talk about stuff that was truly apolitical and wasn't coded liberal, wasn't coded conservative, it got us to a place where we could spend time together. I imagine that was kind of be where we ended, but something interesting happened, which was as we started spending time together, as we just enjoyed hanging out, it became a lot easier to talk about some of this stuff. So I remember we were like in Santa Cruz, California, and, just ordered burritos. And Matt's like, do you think Trump's going to prison? Right. This was in 2023, right after he was indicted. And even when I worked in the White House, Matt never asked me about politics or what was going on in the country or the world.
So that was the first time that he solicited a political opinion from you on a current event.
Yeah. And it wasn't even him being like, do you think he should? And he certainly wasn't like, whatever you say, I will go with. Right. But he was curious. And more than that, he was comfortable, right? And I also started to feel curious and comfortable around him. So like literally, what was it, a couple of days ago, maybe it was a few weeks ago now, the press secretary at the Carolyn Leavitt, she said, we need more electricians and plumbers and fewer Harvard LGBTQ graduates, right? So not exactly talking about Matt and me, but pretty close, right? I'm
I was going to say kind of a personal attack here. Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're the personal attack and like pumping up my brother.
Yeah, your boy. Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, that's kind of funny. That's a little too, that's close to home. So I texted him and I was like, what do you think of that? And first of all, it's interesting that I was like genuinely curious. And he said something that was really interesting to me, by the way. He said, the last thing I want is more electricians, right? Like,
I don't want more competition.
Right, because if you have more
I got a good racket.
Then everyone's wages go down. So it was really interesting that nobody else in the political realm, including me, noticed that obvious point. But Matt, as an electrician, he was like, yeah, this is not pro-electrician, right? This is like pro people who want to pay electricians less. Yeah. So it was interesting. So I've learned a lot from that. Or even like the day Biden dropped out, like I was on my way to Maniloking, New Jersey, which is kind of near Matt's house, to go surfing with him when I got the like news alert on my phone and I like pulled over and, read the statement. Yeah. Like, holy shit. And then we were just in the water and I was like, so what do you think of all this? Right. Like, and we were having that conversation. And again, you pointed this out in your question. It's not, we don't debate, right? The point is not to be like, I'm going to take you on and like prove you're wrong.
Yeah.
Even though sometimes I think he's wrong and I assume sometimes he thinks I'm wrong. What's the point of that? It's more that I'm actually curious about what he thinks, and I think he's curious about what I think, and that came out of the neutral ground, where I think the common ground remains elusive in a lot of ways, but that's okay.
I rhetorically think that part of the secret for people is to not treat every political conversation as a prompt for your own opinion. Like if you just solicit like, hey, what do you think about whatever the conversation is, no matter how controversial. And then your answer to whatever they say is, oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've inoculated, I think, what winds up bringing us to the worst version of this, which is defensiveness belying defensiveness belying defensiveness that eventually leads you to really, really ugly places.
Yeah.
Because you feel that everything that is said is a prompt for you to then respond with your thoughts as opposed to just ingesting what they've said.
I totally agree with that, but I also do want to just have some empathy for people who react defensively, including me when I do that, because these days we are living through a series of outrageous things that it's a lot harder to listen to someone defend. And I think people feel like that no matter what their political views are. But just to give you an example, right? Like we're watching some of the stuff that ICE is doing, like, masked guys getting out of an unmarked car. And in some cases, just like arresting an American citizen for filming or arresting, someone for just filming them, which they're allowed to do, right? That scares the crap out of me. And I don't know how you feel about it, right? If you sat here and said, actually, I think it's great or I think it's good or whatever, my first feeling, like I would feel a tightness in my chest of like, how could you possibly defend that? It's work. It's real work for me to say, okay, let me listen to you. I'm not going to agree with you, I don't think, but let me listen and actually hear you out. And I'm not saying we should do the work, but it's really hard. And so I just want to agree with you while saying doing what you're talking about is almost physically challenging. And I think that's true of people, no matter who you voted for. And so I think we all should, like, at the very least, give ourselves some credit when we pull it off, right? Like, that's a hard thing to do.
I always wind up going back to this, and so my audience has heard me say it a billion times, but I blame a lot of this on the fact that politics has remained one of the only monocultural elements that we have in society anymore, that everything has sort of split off into its own thing. We don't all watch the same movies anymore. Anime is as popular as Wes Anderson films, but they don't really mesh or talk to each other in a lot of ways. But politics is something for which it is globally covered. It is an international obsession. And very well as a speechwriter that when you are politically messaging, you are very rarely giving anything other than your candidate or party's position to persuade. You want to, inflame the other side's arguments. You want to solidify your side's arguments, and you want to go ahead through with that. And that's where I cover that on this show. I want to tell people where I think it's being done very well, where I think it's being done very poorly. But I don't think it's healthy to talk to friends or family on political talking points. And that's where I think, when you said like, all right, here's a political talking point that is being put out by Carolyn Levitt, which is about red states, feel good about yourself, blue states, take a beat, you're not the main character. That's what she wants to say because it is good for her coalition. And your brother's like, I don't want more electricians. Like, that's stupid. Like, and so that is a breaking out of a narrow idea that is there for political weaponization to a real world idea of how does this affect me tomorrow? And that's where I think that we lose these things. And that's where I think, like, when we get defensive, it's usually because if I say, like you just explained the situation with ICE, which there's mass deportations that are happening. That was a campaign promise. It is happening now. There's no way that happens without ugly versions of these interactions happening just at scale. It's unrealistic to think that this would happen without it. And if you are talking about it from the point of view of the political perspective, then yeah, it's hard to be like, hey, here's what's happening. Agree or disagree. Mm-hmm. And now, that's what good political messaging is. It's either, is this good enough to make you mad, to donate, to volunteer, to vote? And if not, you're not here for it. So you've now defined the other. Yeah. This person that you don't like doesn't believe in that. And therefore it's more important that you go do all those things.
Yeah, I think what is happening also, even despite the monoculture that you're talking about, and I hadn't heard that idea, and I think it's really interesting. At the same time, I think that because social media has fractured even political communication into so many different audiences, and it's made everyone a communicator, right? So I feel like I spend half of my time, or a good chunk of my time, writing about, okay, if you're a Democrat, here's how to talk about this at Thanksgiving, right, with your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the other hand, part of what this book is about is it's also okay to talk about something else, right? Or to talk about something else until you feel okay talking about those things, and someone might actually be receptive to the points that you're making. Not talking points so much as just kind of how you think about the issue. So I think that is, people feel this obligation, right? I have to post, I have to sort of not, it's almost like this, like a 12th man thing on the football field, right? Like the fans are actually and they are influencing the game. The other thing that has changed too is, even in the monoculture, we are living in different, we're living in different worlds in terms of information. I thought this really eye-opening for me. I was on Fox and Friends over the weekend because one of their hosts is a surfer, and he was like, this is cool. It's like, a book about people with different views, but like getting along with surfing. And so he invited me on the show, which I appreciated. And he was really like nice guy. I'm hoping we get to go surfing sometime, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, my guess
could very well be the pipeline to the next Secretary of Defense based on precedent.
Also, I hope to visit him in the Pentagon when he's in charge of our military. But I also think that and my guess is, right, we have very different political views. Mm-hmm. But I was sitting there in the green room because I don't watch a lot of Fox, and the video, the ICE videos on Fox and Friends in the morning are like of a dangerous MS-13 member getting arrested. And the ICE videos that I see on my phone are exclusively of people without criminal records getting beaten up. And my guess, there's a question, obviously you can look into then the quantitative and figure out how much of each thing is happening. But putting that aside for a moment, we're witnessing two different worlds, right? And it's not that either of those was fabricated. It's not an AI like this because I drowned earlier. It's more that it's selective, right? Selective truth. And so we're living in different worlds, even within that monoculture.
Yeah.
And so it's really challenging, but that's the other reason why asking and curiosity can be so important, because sometimes people will say, oh, I saw this thing. And then can be an interesting conversation there, right? Which is sometimes, okay, I'd like to see it, right? What did it say? Or have you seen this other thing, right? Like at the very least, you don't go to the most reductive place, which is, I think, where so many powerful people in sort of media and politics would like us to go, which is to say, oh, you believe that because you're a bad person. So I don't want anything to do with you. Like, a lot of people benefit from that, but they're not us, right? And I just want to make one more point about that, which is when I was on the 2008 Obama campaign as a field organizer, right? And my point here is that in some ways this stuff isn't new. I would sometimes talk to people who would be like, Obama's a terrorist, right? He's like a secret Muslim evil terrorist. And sometimes you just say, thank you very much for your time and move on. But especially early on in the campaign before, long way to election day, sometimes I would ask, okay, why do you say that? And what ended up happening literally every time I asked, and it was like a decent sample size, was that once you got to the bottom of the, why, what do you mean, why, what are you saying, and you were listening, people always had the same concern, which is they would tell me, white people have treated black people so badly in this country that if a black person becomes president, he's going to want revenge. It had nothing to do with, they weren't sure he was a terrorist, but it was a way of expressing something that actually was a policy position, right?
A fear.
Well, it was a fear, but it was also like, I could say, hey, A, I'm a white guy, so if I thought that was true, I wouldn't be here. But B, I could say, I actually, like, if you look at what he wants to do, I think it's going to be good for everybody. And then we were having a discussion. I'm not saying I convinced all those people to vote for Obama, but I'm saying I convinced a few. And no matter what, we were having a discussion about policy and what the president would do in office, rather than about, is he a terrorist, or how dare you call him a terrorist, and slamming the door. And that's a much more productive discussion.
Yeah. The classic example of the dual reality stuff that you just described to me was Black Lives Matter, because almost universally, I can't remember an example. I'm sure they existed, but the left described Black Lives Matter as a declarative statement about how they felt about African Americans. And therefore, the absence of support of that is a declaration of racism, a declaration of prejudice. Conservatives, or the right, when they would talk about it, would almost exclusively talk about an organization that was, accepting money and was organizing protests and has, by way of reporting, massive financial problems. And there are like legitimate questions to be asked about the organization of Black Lives Matter. But what happened in conversation, specifically in online spaces, is how could you not support Black Lives Matter? How could you possibly support Black Lives Matter? And neither the twain shall meet. They were in totally different spheres of influence, where conservative media would every 2 days have, here's another ugly thing about somebody that organized the group Black Lives Matter, or writings that they've said personally, or cultural Marxism, or a donation from some company. And on the other side, it was just, here is some ugly thing that was said that now proves bigotry is alive and well in America, and it needs to be dealt with aggressively.
Yeah. One of the things that I think made this problem worse. I mean, obviously, I think part of the problem was just people fanning the flames, because people benefit from fanning the flames.
Yeah.
Something that I think made this problem worse, and that I do think, I'm a Democrat, like self-recrimination is what we do best. So I'm always a little careful about this, but also it's a good time for it. We have some soul searching to do. I think there was this idea that if you deplatform people who don't agree with you, even if they're kind of right-leaning, but they haven't gone all the way, right?
Yeah.
And I think about it particularly with Joe Rogan, because Matt is a huge Joe Rogan fan, but it's also like the Joe Rogan cinematic universe, where, and people call it the manosphere, but I feel like that's kind of pejorative in a way that I think is part of the problem, right? I think that Democrats, or people like me, and I would have said this, say, well, you don't go on there, it's legitimizing the platform.
Yes.
And now
platforming, one of my least favorite words on the planet.
And I do think there are limits, right? I mean, like if Nick Fuentes was like, hey, want to, talk about your book on my podcast? I would be like, no, thank you. Right. Like, I just, that's a line. Everyone has their own lines. Yes. But I think that I don't think I would be doing it because that would be the end of Nick Fuentes, right? Like, you're not able to deny people platforms in a world where the internet and social media exist. And so one of the problems is that in these spaces that weren't quite neutral, but they were right-leaning and potentially moving further to the right, Democrats weren't showing up. And I think one of the huge lessons that we've all learned from the last couple of years is, if people are not hearing about you from you, they're hearing about you from someone who doesn't like you and might not be honest about you. And so what you're talking about, for example, where most people like me said Black Lives Matter is not about exclusion, it's about inclusion.
Yes.
It's not a specific organization, it's a movement and an idea, right? Like, people didn't hear that view, especially I would be really surprised if people in Matt's demographic group were hearing a lot of that view, but they heard a lot of the other view that you're describing. And so part of the problem is, I think Democrats, we said, our bubble, everyone's in a bubble these days, but we thought our bubble, when you add it all up and with, the effect of Dobbs and so forth, it's enough that we're 52% of the country, something like that. And it turned out, at least in this last election, that we were, 48% of the country. And that's the difference between
winning and losing
right now. Yeah, winning and losing at a moment when we all agreed, and it turned out, I think we were right, that it was the most important election of our lifetimes, right? Like that was, I think looking back, people were like, yeah, you say that about every election. Well, I don't know. This one definitely was true. And I think, we made a gamble without realizing it that we could eke out a sort of culture war victory. And instead, we lost by a small but very decisive margin. And now we got to figure out how to pick up the pieces because there's a lot at stake.
So if you were back to your full-time political operative status and you are now ensconced in this friendship that you have with your brother-in-law, there's a lot of conversation, I'm sure that you are aware of which way modern Democrat in terms of trying to repair these divides. Obviously, you were talking about larger lessons that everybody can learn of in this book. It's only drowning. But if I were to ask you to put on your blue hat and say, for the Democratic Party, what scaffolding do you build to start engendering trust with voters like Matt, what would you say?
I would say fire me and hire someone who didn't go to college. That's the first thing I would do. Then if you have the budget, rehire me, but hire them also. Because I think that's part of the problem is that I think I have lots of good ideas, right? And I'm going to stand by that. I got some good ideas, but lots of people have some good ideas. And one of the problems for Democrats these days, and it comes from, it's not, our intentions are good, but we end up being a party of people who are all college educated, generally from a pretty select group, like highly selective colleges. And we sit around at tables and say, how come people who didn't go to college and who work in the trades don't feel listened to by us? And it's part of it is look around the room, right? That if you look around the room,
they're not here.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just that they're not here. It's also that we can focus group them, but we're not spending time with people. And there's a difference between focus grouping and studying people and spending time with them. And again, I'm not holding myself up as like the paragon of this, right? I wrote a book about being friends with one person. This is a small sample size, but I'm also not the Democratic Party. So yes. I would say I am speaking as someone, I'm doing the bare minimum. So you can learn from that and do more, which is to say, I think that if you are, if you're not spending time with people who are in the groups that you're trying to win back, it's going to be a lot harder to win them back. And one of the things that I always point to is during the Harris campaign, which is a sprint to the finish, that definitely, if you ever worked in Democratic politics, especially at a presidential level, you got pulled into a lot of conference calls, right? It was just, It was the nature of it. And I think they ran a good campaign given the time that they had, right? It was not, that we can talk about it, but no, and no one's perfect, but this isn't a criticism of the people.
They were. Look, that was a
World Fair's job, and they did it pretty well.
Yeah, I would say there's only so much that the fifth reshoot of a movie that launched without a script and changed directors twice can.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a more regular person way of saying what I was saying via euphemism, but I agree with you. But I will say that sometimes I'd be on a call about messaging or, conversation with someone or whatever. And the question would essentially be like, what would real people think about this? By which people kind of meant the men who didn't go to college who were losing. We can tell that we're losing them, not just white men, but, across the board.
Yeah.
And I would say, I don't know, let me go surfing and I'll get back to you about that.
Yeah.
And I realized that was not a common experience, right? There was just that having a friend who was in a demographic group that was so different than me is just not something many of us do anymore. And again, it's not because Democrats are elite or bad people or anything like that. I just want to be careful about this. It's because we're all living in bubbles. I mean, there was a study, a bunch of Harvard researchers analyzed census tracts, and they found that by the standards sociologists use for racial segregation, 99% of us, 98% of us live in a politically segregated bubble.
Yeah.
So all of us are in those bubbles. But when you're the party trying to get back to winning the popular vote, then it's on you to figure out how to get people who are living in a different bubble to start to listen to you again and start to be open to your ideas.
Well, I'll tell you what, they are very, very wise words, and there are many, many more of them in the book. It's Only Drowning. David, thank you so much for joining us and for the good conversation. Where can people find the book?
You can find the book wherever you get your books, I believe is the technical term. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org if you want to order online from a local bookstore, or just walk into your local bookstore or library and ask for It's Only Drowning.
And it is out now?
It's out now.
It is out now. All right. So I always let the authors do the whole spiel. I will say what I know is true. Amazon. Go buy it on Amazon if you want to hear it. The Amazon rankings matter the most for everybody. So go buy it on Amazon. It's what the publishers watch. Thank you, David, for coming on and making time for us.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, written by me too. For Dog and Pony Show audio here in Austin, Texas, our producer is Will Saddleberg. You can send me an email, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Find, follow, and share video clips of the show. TikTok's Justin R. Young. X, Justin R. Young. YouTube is Politics. It's where you can see full video episodes of this show. It's a great time. Support me with a one-time donation, paypal.me/payjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3Cash, and you can send me anything you'd like in the mail. Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. But the only place you get our bonus episodes are TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Paying members get 2 bonus episodes each and every week, one on Sunday, one on Thursday, and spoiler alert, we're only doing 1 free episode next week. I'm taking the Friday episode off for the 4th of July. But you still get your 2 bonus episodes. You still get your Substack episodes next week. That will show up for you, rain or shine. Now's a great time to join. And if you get on the annual package, that's $99. That puts you well into the primaries for the midterms. Oh, it's a good time to get on it. And that's for less than $1 an episode with how much you get. You're making money with that one. But if you want your name read at the end of the show, there's only one place to do it. And that is our foundational tier. Very Asimovian name, our foundational tier. These folks, these legends, get their name read at the end of every episode that we put out on the big feed. Sonny Black, L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes. Oh yeah, it's Adam, Neil, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony PJs from New York, Will Porta, The Borge B, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Devon, Paul, a dog named Checkers, Gloria, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley, Stephen, and Zombie Doc. Join their ranks. Become a legend, immortal, by having your name on the podcast. You know you want to. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. We'll be back next week. 1 episode, but we're going to make it count because we're going to find out, can Congress hop to it and put the one big, beautiful bill over the finish line in time to flip the burgers for July 4th? Tune in next week, friends. Till then, this is your old pal, Justin Robert Young, saying some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. This is the only one that did discuss all 3. All right, one Baby Bella cameo. Come on. Bring her on over. Oh, we got a baby. We got a baby on the free feed. Hi, baby. Hi. Bye, everybody. Bye. Bye. See you later, friends.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.